right. That was quite a roller coaster from love to disgust, who hopefully our next speaker will bring together and help us to do the former a bit more and the latter a bit less. Give it up for Akila Kadambi from the University of California, LA.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. This is my first OHBM, so it's very nice to be able to give a talk, and thank you to the organizers for organizing this wonderful conference. So my talk is titled Rehumanizing the Dehumanized, using neural responses for the unhoused using dimension-based rehumanization. Okay, so I wanted to just start with some relatively grim statistics. So I'm from Los Angeles, California, and in the last, since 2015 to now 2023, we've seen almost double the increase in rates of homelessness in Los Angeles alone. And what's perhaps a little bit more grim is that the number of, aside from the increasing rates, the death rate has also significantly increased and steadily increased since 2015. And what's perhaps most grim in this is that the mortality rate is not just due to natural causes, it's unfortunately linked in a large part to homicide. And most of these are actually from Los Angeles, but these are just quick headlines where you can really see that there's a lot of sort of unfortunate targeting towards these groups. Actually, we were just traveling here to Korea, and there was one from my university. I'm half-time at USC, and someone killed the homeless man when he was trying to get into a car. So taken together, these, both sort of the societal evidence, but also in terms of the neuroscience, there's a lot of recent calls really aiming to shed light on how social inequality can be linked to brain structure and function. And this is a recent perspective article from Nature Human Behavior by Hatzenbuehler and colleagues. And in social psychology, there are prevalent models. So Susan Fiske work, she has this model called the stereotype content model. It's a very sort of prevalent model in terms of how people stereotype different groups. And really, it sheds light on two specific axes for how people stereotype. One pertains more to warmth, which is feelings of friendliness, and the other is more related to competence, like how skilled they are or their sense of their degree of expertise. What's interesting with these groups is that you can kind of map different, careers onto this space. So you can have businessmen be like, highly competent but less warm. You can have, social groups. You can have elderly people be more warm but less competent. But there's a group which you could probably predict that falls so low on kind of both these axes, both in warmth and both in competence. This is pretty well replicated across different ethnic groups and different racial groups, different populations, different countries. But what they generally show is that this group falls so low, oftentimes they're not mappable and they're considered low warmth and low competence. And what they've shown in terms of the neuroscience is these populations are very dehumanized. So, not just in terms of the psychological models, but also in terms of network-related activity. They see reduced activity in, networks associated with humanization, including the mentalizing network. They show, overlaps with disgust processing, like the last talk. So all these things, and really, there seems to be alterations really at the neuroscientific level. And so here we aimed to test whether we could actually design an intervention that could rehumanize our perceptions of these groups using strategies from social neuroscience, and by these groups referring to unhoused individuals, and what dimensions may be particularly informative, as well as what are their underlying neural correlates. So we had this rehumanization intervention that consisted both of a static component and a dynamic component. We ran this intervention on 40 participants. They were all American, and we conducted both pre and post measures. We had a battery of different individual difference measures related to belonging and inclusion and social processing, all these things. But we had specific measures that we measured both before and after the intervention, which were the attitudes towards homelessness inventory, inclusion of other in the self, which measures the degree of self-expansion that you might have with different groups, and then in-group, out-group bonding. So for time reasons, I'm mainly going to focus on the results from the static rehumanization condition, but I'll touch on the dynamic condition as well. So in the static condition, it was a block design of 3 different runs, and again, pre-assessment, we had these different individual differences that we measured. Then they had one run, which was a baseline run, and then the last run was also a baseline run, really to just measure pre and post neural activity before the intervention. And then the actual intervention was this rehumanization scan right here. And in the pre and post runs, we examined neural responses to both high status, which are groups that fall really in that quadrant that's high in warmth and high in competent, and this is taken a lot from social psychology work. And we also examined neural responses during the time in which they viewed unhoused populations. In the rehumanization intervention, we only focused on the unhoused group, so we only had unhoused individuals in that scan. And in the intervention, we had 6 different dimensions that we focused on, and these dimensions were aimed to facilitate rehumanization towards these groups. And these dimensions were predominantly taken from prevalent work in social neuroscience that shows that these dimensions are important for humanizing different groups. So the first was universalism, which was more of this collective sense of connecting the unhoused person to oneself. Self-similarity was a more individualistic connection, so we actually got participants' interests and hobbies and things about them before the task, and then we actually show it to them during the scan. Simulation comes a little bit more from cognitive neuroscience work, which is the idea of motor simulation and embodied cognition. So they would imagine the unhoused person doing different actions. And then warmth and competence again came from Susan Fiske's work, and all of this was compared to a control condition in which they just examined if a dot was present on the image. And so with the task, I should actually really say what the task was, because during the intervention, they would see each of these dimensions, and they'd be paired with an image of an unhoused person. And it was all block design, so each block pertained to a different dimension for a total of 6 blocks. And then we had 3 repetitions per block, and each photograph was a unique photograph. For the dynamic condition, we wanted kind of a more immersive a measure of rehumanization. So in addition to the static component, this condition just had them watch a video, and this video was showing unhoused people in different living conditions. This was all publicly available, and we got this from online resources. And so what we found first in terms of the behavioral results was that the rehumanization intervention improved people's attitudes towards homelessness. And this was actually a pretty robust finding, and was very interesting to us because actually our population was undergrad students who generally are not, they generally have pretty positive attitudes towards not dehumanizing these groups. But we did see a significant difference in their attitudes towards homelessness. So there were more positive attitudes towards homelessness after the intervention, and also their sense of belonging with the unhoused. And then these were just subscales that showed, again, this difference of attitudes towards homelessness. At the neural level, when we compared post versus pre-neural activity in rehumanization, and this was comparing the baseline runs to each other, we found significant signal change in primarily somatoaffective regions, including the central and parietal opercula and posterior insula after rehumanization. And the neural change was actually grounded in the individual difference measures in post-rehumanization. So we found that this related to both inclusion of the other in self, which is a measure of how much they feel that the unhoused person was included in their self-concept, as well as sense of belonging. And then we examined the different dimensions for rehumanization. And we found that for both universalism and competence, we found pretty robust engagement of regions traditionally associated with mentalizing. For warmth and simulation, we found both somatoaffective as well as some memory regions, including the hippocampus. And what was perhaps the most robust finding out of all the dimensions was self-similarity, which again was the connecting the unhoused person to oneself. And here we found very robust recruitment of regions associated with mentalizing. We took a hub seed in the VMPFC and conducted a functional connectivity analysis using the VMPFC as a seed region. We found that this was also functionally connected, all the regions. Then we conducted a few multiple regression models using all the different dimensions in the model in order to predict pre-post change in our functionally derived regions of interest that came from the pre-post neural change. So, our activity was primarily left lateralized, but when we looked at a subthreshold, so we used kind of a standard thresholding measure. When we looked more subthreshold, we found the activity was largely bilateral. So we included all the bilateral regions and then corrected for multiple comparisons in all these regions. And we found that across all of these functionally derived regions of interest, self-similarity robustly predicted the most neural change in rehumanization. And on the dynamic task, again, just going to touch on this for time reasons, but we found when we conducted the intersubject synchrony analysis, so this was just measuring shared overlap between subjects as they watched this dynamic condition, watched the movie. We took the VMPFC as our seed region again based on its findings from all of our results from the static task. And we found an inverse relationship between VMPFC activity and sense of belonging with the unhoused. And really what this shows is that people with more idiosyncratic responses in the VMPFC show more of a sense of belonging with the unhoused versus people who have less. So we think it could be that they're sort of seeing something or feeling something that most people might not feel, and that kind of contributes to their sense of empathizing and including them. Okay, so in conclusion, we found that actually our intervention was, seemed to work pretty well. And so we found that behavioral and neural responses to unhoused groups can be improved after rehumanization. We found that these feelings were grounded in neural change in somatoaffective as well as brain regions, as well as related to individual differences in belonging and self-expansion. And self-similarity seemed to be a particularly robust strategy that could be used hopefully to promote rehumanization. So with that, I'd just like to thank all our amazing collaborators, Sophronia, who's here today, and then our PI, Lisa Zisade, Antonio Damasio, Jonas Kaplan, and the rest of the team. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for your lovely talk. We actually, it's getting more and more. We don't really have time for questions. I tried to cram 2 in 1, and you make it very short. Okay. How long do you think those effects last? And is the intervention goal in itself to create those long-lasting effects, or would you like to build upon that in any way?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you could tell from our task, we were looking at pre-post activity before and after, right before and right after the intervention. And our next question was really to look at longitudinal change, because this is not longitudinal, and the hope is that we can really have an intervention that can be longitudinal. So we are following up with participants right now and recollecting survey responses on this task.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Yep.